Hey everybody, thank you for joining me. I am going to talk to you today about Wisconsin versus Minnesota, but more particularly because both states stretch quite a few miles. I can't possibly talk about both states in entirety. So I'm just going to tell you up front my personal experiences. I've lived in Milwaukee for 2 years, and I've lived in the Twin Cities metro, more on the Minneapolis side, almost my entire life. The Milwaukee side, I was going to college, and so I had two different residences that I can speak for personal experience with you. They were both technically in Milwaukee, but one was closer to the lake downtown, and then one was on the edge of the actual city, so it was almost the suburbs. So it gave me a slightly different vibe or flavor as I lived in that actual city. And then in terms of the Minneapolis side, I've lived in a couple of different areas, including St. Cloud, and then most of them are closer to the metro. So I'll just give you a quick tour on my pros of living in Milwaukee. One of them that you might not expect is that my allergies were bad. I don't know if that's the case for anybody else, but I just felt some relief in those 2 years. I don't remember taking any of my allergy medicines, so I don't know if Milwaukee itself doesn't have certain plants that my body is sensitive to in Minnesota, but I do remember having some relief. However, to be very honest, it's been quite a few decades since I lived in Milwaukee, so I don't know if I would be able to replicate that experience. And I definitely wouldn't just move to Milwaukee because of my allergies. But after all these years, it is something that I remember significantly. Like I said, I basically have been raised here, moved to Milwaukee, and came back. So, which is actually a very common story for a lot of people. They'll leave for college or for a short period and then find themselves back in Minnesota. And I think that's where there's that reputation that it's a little bit harder to make friends in Minnesota, is because it's just people stay, or if they leave, they come back. I think that if you can push yourself to make new friends, it's always going to be hard initially to do that. Hopefully work and clubs and different things that you join will break down some of those barriers. So just general information about Minnesota that you might not know is we have skyways, which I think is really fun downtown. So you can actually keep your feet from getting wet or having to wear boots, especially if you're going out for a nice restaurant or an event. You can use the skyway system. Cabin life is a really big part of Minnesota culture, though I think that that's similar in Wisconsin. I'm sure a lot of people have second homes around the lakes. Of course, if you love lakes, we're going to be a great state to choose because you even have lakes in the metro area. You don't necessarily have to have a second cabin to enjoy lake life. And that's something that I've always had a disconnect with people who have cabins. It's we have so many great choices in the metro. You don't necessarily have to get in the car for 1, 2, 3 hours when you have so many choices nearby. We are known for our education. I don't think that is just lip service. I think that there's data to show that especially particular parts of the Twin Cities are known for really great education. And of course, we have some really well-known colleges, if that's the time in your life you're at, versus the little people, but both very well known for being an educated state. The other thing that I remember being slightly different than living in Minneapolis was the weather. Now, Wisconsin has 4 seasons. We're talking about 2 Midwestern states. It's not significantly different by any means. I just remember that the winters were a little bit warmer and the summers were a little bit cooler. Now, remember, again, I was in Milwaukee, so I don't know that would be true, in Eau Claire for sure. I think that was definitely lake effect that they talk about. And I just really enjoyed that it just felt a little bit cooler in the summer and a little bit warmer in the winter than it did growing up in Minneapolis. So that definitely stood out to me. I'm just going to give you some facts that I have looked up on my own. They say that living in Wisconsin is 2.4% cheaper than living in Minnesota. In terms of taxes, I'm not going to pretend to be any sort of tax expert. I just remember, because I worked in a clothing store, that the taxes were different. And I think that at the end of the day, you're going to pay taxes. Taxes are going to be distributed differently in different states. In fact, from my little bit of research, Wisconsin's the 3rd highest Midwest state behind Minnesota and Iowa for taxes. So it sounds like you're going to pay a little bit more in Minnesota. I think Minneapolis is a slightly bigger city population-wise, and just driving around, it feels different because in Milwaukee, at least, You've got the lake that's kind of cutting all that off. And I know we always talked about north, south, west, east of Milwaukee, but there kind of just felt like there wasn't an east Milwaukee because you were going to run into the lake, right? So I think between having Minneapolis and St. Paul, the city might be a little bit intimidating from the Wisconsin point of view. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's just me guessing, since, again, I grew up here, so that's just my guess for somebody. Minnesota is ranked for really high for affordability, culture, festivals, things like that. We don't have Somerset, but we our state fair tends to draw a bigger crowd than the Wisconsin one does. So overall, what's the better state to live in? I'm not really sure that they're dramatically that different. I didn't feel like living in Wisconsin felt that much different culturally than what I was used to. I guess I just felt like I was kind of from a bigger city, but there was also still a learning curve of getting around Milwaukee. If you are moving here from Wisconsin and you just don't even know what part to pick, now of course your job or schooling or something might help dictate that. I borrowed this information from lifeinminnesota.com. This is their 20 best places to live in Minnesota. So I guess take that with a grain of salt because I don't know exactly what their metrics are. So number 1 is Chanhassen, Minnesota, which is a little bit west of the actual city of Minneapolis. It would be a little bit of a drive. Lots of people live there. I think it excels in most categories. I think a part of why Chanhassen scores so high is 97% of students will receive a high school diploma. It's also one of the most gainfully employed cities in the state, 2.4% unemployment rate, and the household income is really high, which aka it's a wealthier area to live in, which means housing is going to also be more expensive. It has the Chanhassen Dinner Theater, which a lot of people will travel to, and the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum is an attraction a lot of people will go down and see. And again, very low crime rates. Number 2 is Lakeville, Minnesota. Not an area that I'm going to pretend to be particularly knowledgeable about. It's south of Burnsville. So again, it's a little bit outside of that first, second, third level suburb ring. So it's going to be a little bit more driving if you choose to live in Lakeville. Just according to the website, not me. It, again, has a very low unemployment rate and, again, is a little bit more on the expensive side. Number 3 is St. Michael. This is an area I'm extremely familiar with because I don't live in St. Michael, but I live in a neighboring town. Most people call it St. Michael Albertville because that's what the school district is. It's not all the way out to St. though you do, again, have to take quite a bit of a trip past the main city. You're probably going to be 40 minutes in the car if you're going into the airport. So you're going to get that small town feel in St. Michael, though it has a lot of big city things, including a well-known outlet mall. Economically, again, a very strong community. Household incomes are around $86,000 and rent is around $1,000, though I'm not completely sure that that's accurate even at the time of making this video. Unemployment's very low. And I don't know if it's still true, but one thing I was aware of when I was a teacher is that there was no low income housing in that area. And I always wondered if that was why the rankings on the school were a little bit higher than some of the other cities nearby, because if you simply don't have that option, those things go hand in hand with school rankings. All right, I'm going to go through these last couple ones quickly so you can do your own research if they're going to be a good area for you. Number 4 is Northfield. Again, an area I wouldn't pretend to be particularly familiar with because it's just south of Lakeville, so it's kind of that same area. Number 5 is Victoria, which is west of the Minneapolis, but it's south of Lake Minnetonka area. And then let's see, number 6 is Edina, which is almost Minneapolis. It's sort of south and west of Minneapolis. It's going to be a first ring suburb. So if you are looking to be very close to the downtown, uptown area, Edina would be a fantastic choice for you. And Number 8 is Rogers, Minnesota. Again, much closer to where I live because I'm in the way west, not even the suburbs. I'm past the suburbs. And Rogers is like that. Rogers has a lot of shopping opportunity. So even though you're going to be close to a main interstate 94, so you can jump on and off if you need to get down to the downtown main city area. However, Rogers itself has a lot of shopping, so you could just stay in town and not necessarily need to take advantage of the big city things if you weren't into that. Number 9 is Eagan, and then last on my list is 10, which is Waconia. They're different parts. Eagan is more south suburbs and Waconia is more west again. I am happy to be a resource to you, whether you're thinking about going from Minnesota to Wisconsin or Wisconsin to Minnesota. Either way, I am a realtor here in the Twin Cities and am always happy to chat with you if you have any particular questions. Thank you so much for joining me today.